Thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Why Schedule Quality Matters, hosted by Deltek. I'm Becca Rosenblatt, an events coordinator here at Deltek. Joining me today is Tom Poland, Solutions Architect here at Deltek. Welcome, Tom.
Hi, thanks, Becca, and thanks everyone for joining today. We've got a fun topic. We're going to talk about failure and success with projects and what some of the key contributing factors can be. The title tells you exactly where I'm headed today, the importance of schedule quality with respect to program execution success. Okay, let's talk about the state of affairs today. We're going to basically do today's session in three major sections. We're going to talk about the way things are, the way things can be, and then a live demonstration of some of the tools that we have that can help you bring schedule quality during a planning process. But first things first, let's talk about the state of affairs today and how we're hoping to change the thinking on why projects succeed and fail. More on that in a moment. Let's talk about stakeholders. They're either spending money if they're the owner, and they're making money, hopefully making money if they're the contractor. You want to do the right projects, and you want to do projects right. Project selection can't be underestimated. We won't talk much about that today. We're going to assume that your company and your line of business is doing the work that's most important to you and really is the reason why you want to be in business. Obviously not always the case. That's going to be one of our assumptions today. Now, something that we've learned as we've set out on this schedule quality journey and looking at thousands and thousands of real-world projects is the execution itself is not the cause of the failure. It's where we see the failure. This is one of these cases where we've really found out that the battle is won or lost before it was ever fought. And by looking back at successful and unsuccessful programs, looking back at their planning process and literally their baseline schedules, we found the indicators of project failure before, in many cases, the contract was even signed to work on the project. That kind of came as a surprise to us. That aspect didn't come as a surprise, how repeatable and how prevalent it was, and how we got to the point where we could look at the planning documentation and the planning process of a project and predict before it even happens whether or not it would be successful, and help organizations take the steps to make their plan of a high quality so that their project is successful. In fact, I have some examples of that coming up in the presentation where we've changed companies' thinking and directly contributed to their bottom line. Here's some interesting statistics. I'll be sprinkling some statistics in as we go today. Only 6% say that their projects come in on time and on budget. And let's talk about poor quality and the cost of poor quality. That leads to $120 billion wasted annually in the U.S. alone based on construction projects that don't make it. And as we said, we're finding that they don't make it not because of failures of the execution team, rather the execution team performing to a poor plan. And the state of affairs today, some other interesting things here. Significant vendor consolidation, that's the mode really across industries right now, especially when it comes to work related to the government. With that consolidation becomes an increased focus on collaboration. We're seeing larger companies, in fact a couple of defense companies merged yesterday, Orbital Sciences and ATK. So we're seeing, and they both do and perform government contracts. In addition, so the large companies large and mid-sized companies are tending to consolidate, and then within themselves and within the smaller companies that are emerging, that are creating these new ways of doing business, the focus is increasingly on collaboration. We at Deltek collaborate around the world. I'm in Arizona, Rebecca's in Virginia. Most of the team that I support is in Austin, Texas. What are the tools that help us execute on a project team despite these limitations of where we are. We're not always in the same place at the same time. It's the same way with partner companies who are forced like never before to work together to survive. So knowing that, how can they do that best? In fact, I have a sneak peek of some collaborative tools and methods coming up later in the presentation. Scheduling. This is a hot topic for me because this is something that I've done for a long time, is scheduling. That's the role that I've predominantly been in my career. I've seen a couple things happen. Brain drain continues. That's, it's kind of fun. It's fun to say brain drain, but it's true as well. I have a statement here: the scheduling tools are becoming commodity tools. I would argue that the art of scheduling is being commoditized by management as well, where it's not viewed as the art and science that it once was, and it's viewed as something that can be done as quickly as checking a box. And that's a very dangerous place to be because, as I mentioned, execution failures happen during the planning process. The schedule is the ultimate planning document for your project. If the resources and the tools are being viewed as commodity resources, more of a science or an exercise than an art form, we lose that ability to plan properly, to be insightful, to be skeptical, and we turn it into an exercise where we think we can take some prototype schedule structures, mash them into a master schedule, hit the baseline button, and go proceed on the project. Now, there's some huge flaws in what I just described, but it's representative of some of the very same environments that I myself have been in, and I am guilty as charged on certain projects of doing exactly what I just described, treating my own art and science as a commodity, checking the box, taking responsibility for too many schedules at one time, and having my hands full, not being able to answer questions on any one of those schedules that I've been maintaining at the time. In certain environments, typically I've maintained 8 to 13 schedules myself. That's already too many. And in state government, I've maintained over 100 schedules at the same time. I didn't know what was going on with any of those individual schedules. They were all pretty good. But again, I had my own commodity farm going of schedules, and none of them had the level of quality that we're going to be talking about today. Risk management, increasing awareness. It continues to be reactive and not proactive. By that we mean we wait for things to hit the fan before we start taking corrective action. And in hindsight, you look at it and say, well, we should have known that could have happened. We should have known that we had that risk. Well, we probably did. And someone on the project team, maybe in the organization, or maybe some resources we could have used in the industry, could have helped us arrive at and mitigate those risks before they ever occurred during execution. Again, that goes back to planning. It goes back to that risk management exercise that can start before the project even begins. We say risk management, and we think that's an execution activity, and it certainly is. But those risks should be managed starting at the proposal phase. Even in the project selection phase, is this project too risky for us to take on? The answer might be yes, but if we're not asking the question at the time, we might blindly go into planning, bidding, winning, and executing the work, not thinking about this huge risk, which could undermine our ability to execute and make us a statistic in that 120 billion, where we wasted our money, the project got canceled, the government or customer didn't get what they wanted, and everybody had to walk away, and then it tends to spend the next decade in court and claims analysis. Cost management, separating that from scheduling, really leading with the schedule prior to doing active and proactive cost management. If you don't have a good schedule, your cost management is constantly chasing its tail because your execution keeps coming off the rails, really because the rails were never very well defined in the first place. Okay, let's talk about the project management industry a little bit. And I've hit this a little bit already. I got ahead of myself in some of my preaching there. But the monitoring, forecasting, and assigning blame process. Now, you won't find that in any textbook, which is unfortunate because that's the reality of where the project management industry has been for a long time. I'm not saying, I'm not claiming doom and gloom and that it's that way in every single case, but we've seen it tend in that direction more often than not, where we spend more time and money pointing the finger when things go wrong than investing in quality planning in order to prevent things from going wrong. That's what we see happening, is so much time and energy is spent reactively instead of using historical information, using real projects to say, let's not be one of those. Let's have the characteristics and qualities of projects that have been successful. And we'll show you during this presentation, it's not just preaching. I'm going to give you specific metrics, specific things that you can start looking at today that will help benchmark you with projects that have actually, real projects that have actually been successful. So if you want to be, I always use the Olympic athlete example. If you want to go to the Olympics, plan on being very lucky, but also plan on training the way that former Olympians have trained, and then maybe even finding your own special ways to improve on that. But if you're going to train the opposite, the way that these Olympic athletes have trained, you better hope that you have a lot of luck, because you may not get there. Okay, now let's talk about this better way that I'm driving towards here. Improving the quality of the underlying plan. Enforcing the best practice when entering data. Even before that, knowing what those best practices are, both industry-wide and at your particular organization and company. Project diagnostics. At a moment's notice, this isn't just a one-time project diagnostic exercise. At a moment's notice, being able to measure the quality and impact of quality on your plan, whether this be the proposal phase, the project baseline phase, or the project execution phase. I want to know at the drop of a hat where my schedule stands in terms of quality. Why? Because of what we talked about. If I have a good plan, I have a much, much greater chance of execution. So by studying and diagnosing my plan, I'm really diagnosing my ability to execute the project. Now, there's some other things, too, that need to be in your toolbox to do this well. One is project optimization. Being able to tune and improve your schedule when things do go wrong. They will, I promise. And being able to optimize at a moment's notice without it being a lengthy exercise. Every minute you spend optimizing is inefficient because you're spending that time optimizing instead of executing to an optimized plan. Now, how do you do that? How do you know what to optimize? You need to manage risk. You need to have a firm awareness of what is currently going wrong on the project, what can go wrong, and when and how you saved the day when something was going to go, identified as going to go wrong, and some money, time, and resources were invested so that it didn't go wrong. All those three aspects of risk have to be managed and worked together so that you know where you're late now, where you're going to be late in the future, and where you're going to spend too much money. When you know those things and then put optimization strategies in effect, optimization and mitigation, you can prevent those problems from happening. If you're blind to that, you don't do that as a discipline, those things will come to haunt you every single time. I love driving from Phoenix, Arizona to the Grand Canyon. There's only one road that connects. It's Interstate 17. It gets you up to Flagstaff. There's only one efficient road to get from Phoenix to Flagstaff and then on to the Grand Canyon. And I only check the road conditions of Interstate 17 about half the time that I go to the Grand Canyon. I'm only doing my risk management half the time. If I successfully check and look and I see, well, there's traffic. There's a lot of traffic. There's been an accident. I have two choices. I have three choices, really. I could not make the trip. In that case, project selection. This is not the right project at the right time because of the risk of me sitting on I-17 for 10 hours, which can happen on a 3-hour trip. Number two is I could take an alternate route. I could say, well, that would take me 8 or 10 hours, but there's a guaranteed way that I can get there in 5 hours. It normally takes me 3, but that may take 7 or 8. So maybe I'll take this alternate route, and I'm guaranteed to get there in 5 hours. I know the exact cost of doing that. It's about a 2 to 3 hour cost. Now I better check that route too, because that alternate route might have problems as well. But it has a higher chance. There's less traffic. It has a higher probability of getting me there in under 8 hours. Now number 3 is I might say, hey, I just need to get to the Grand Canyon by tomorrow. And we've learned in the past that sometimes when there's an accident, it frees up by the time that I get to the accident site. So since we have 24 hours to get there, and it might only take a maximum of 10 hours, well, I'll do it. I'll make sure I have a full tank of gas. I'll make sure I have food in the car. I'll make sure my phone's all charged up in case there's problems, and we'll go ahead and proceed anyway. That way, I've set the expectation. I've managed the process. I didn't end up sitting on the highway saying, well, wait, I didn't know this happened. I didn't know there was an accident. Oh, what bad luck. Well, was it bad luck, or did I fail to plan and do the risk assessment necessary to see when I would actually arrive at my destination? Now, that's kind of it's kind of a small but real example, but apply that to all the different functions on your project. And just those 3 ways of looking at my Grand Canyon trip can save you a lot of time and energy down the road. Now, you don't want paralysis by analysis. You can't do a risk assessment on every single employee getting to your plant on time in the morning, unless you're doing something extremely time sensitive, in which case that might be the most important thing. So there needs to be, and this will differ for every project and every organization, there needs to be an efficient, manageable way of doing this. I don't check the traffic every time that I get in the car, but if I'm going to be taking a long trip, especially to some of these areas in Arizona where there's only one way in and one way out, it's smart for me to check the traffic before I go. As I mentioned, I only do that half the time, so I'm really not that smart. All right, let's move forward here. Importance of a sound schedule. I'm going to pay particular attention on this slide to this S1 to S5. We call this the S1 to S5 maturity framework. Now, this is an emerging practice. Now, I've been saying that for a few years, so I don't know, maybe it's an emerged practice now, where it talks about how I go from planning, which is we call our S1, making our best baseline schedule, and how I do some things that maybe I hadn't done in the past, and maybe you've done in some form, but not proceeded according to this methodology. And I'll talk briefly about each one of these. S1 is doing what you're doing today in your scheduling tool. You're capturing the scope, you're sequencing the events, and you're putting it in a scheduling tool, which might range from a simple scheduling tool to a far more complex scheduling tool. Critiquing the schedule. This is something that I only did notionally in the past, which is understanding if my schedule actually makes sense. Now, for some projects, especially in my early years as a scheduler, this was making sure that I didn't have any open ends in the schedule. Every activity had a predecessor and every activity had a successor, and I considered it a critiqued schedule. Well, I'll be showing you some metrics today that go much more deeply than that and are correlated with schedule success, schedule and project success. Third, taking those known unknowns and building them into a risk-adjusted schedule. I tell everyone it takes me 3 hours to get to the Grand Canyon, but if you average out, it never takes me less than 3 hours, but oftentimes, almost 50% of the time, there is some traffic problem along the way. Again, because there's a very thin pipe to get there. So really, I should expect that it takes me closer to 3.5 hours on average to get to the Grand Canyon, and as many as 7 or 8 hours. That would be my risk-adjusted schedule, taking into account the fact that it doesn't always take me 3 hours to get there, and it never takes me fewer than 3 hours. It can only take me 3 hours or longer. Should I plan for 3 hours on the nose? Probably not. Yet I do every single time, and I'm always disappointed that I'm behind schedule. It's time for me to make a risk-adjusted schedule for my Grand Canyon trip. Optimized. If I absolutely positively need to get there in 3 hours, what can I do? Well, I could take a helicopter. I could take a plane. That would be more expensive, But if there's an emergency and I absolutely positively need to get there, what are the other scenarios that would get me there on time? Can they be done? Do I have the time and resources? Maybe I have the money for a helicopter, which I don't, by the way, but I need a pilot because I can't fly a helicopter, and I'm not going to try. So I need to make sure that I have those things lined up. I could come up with a dream plan, but it needs to be feasible, and I need to have the resources, time, cost, individuals to be able to do it. Finally, everyone has to buy into that scenario. I can't simply say, family, we're taking a helicopter to the Grand Canyon if my family has a fear of flying. I mean, that's a silly example, but translate that to your project. You might have the best way to execute a project, but it might go against the values and the customs of your organization to do it that way, and they don't buy in to your contingency plan. So historically, project teams have been strong on these first couple items, but really things tend to fall apart, especially if validation becomes a check-the-box exercise because there's a lot of trust, sometimes misplaced trust, that all of these items have been done to the best possible level. I'm going to move a little quickly now because we're going to talk more about some of these and I don't want to run out of time. So I'm going to skip this slide for now. It's going to be in the slide presentation that we sent out to everyone now. Downstream effect of schedule quality. Upstream is making an informed selection. Now, it's downstream for your projects later on that are going to use your current schedules as the basis of how they're executed. Schedule quality affects whether or not you're realistically planning or you're creating these sunny day scenarios that really can't be executed. On into execution, you can execute the plan perfectly, but if the plan was no good, you're executing to a no good plan, which is not going to meet the goals of your stakeholder. Let me give you an example. If the plan only accommodates or counts for 80% of the project scope, you'll deliver all 80% of the scope of the project. And the customer will be left scratching their head where the other 20% is. You don't want to be in that situation. And then finally, close out and lessons learned. Why not have a high-quality schedule that can be used to benchmark future jobs for your company? I love statistics. I love polls. It gives us a lot of insight. This one looks good on the surface. We recently asked during another presentation what key performance indicators your company currently tracks. And hey, this is great. 24% are doing schedule. Now that was exclusive, meaning they weren't doing the others. Cost, 12%. Okay, performance, 20%. And all of the above, 28%. And none of the above, 16%. But if you look, schedule on its own, 24%, all of the above, 28%, a little bit of arithmetic tells me that's just over 50% are looking at schedule KPIs at all. And 16% aren't looking at anything. So the other 35% are just looking at cost and performance, roughly. So where does that leave us in terms of tracking schedule indicators? Only half are doing it, yet we've seen time and time again a bad plan, a substandard plan, leads to a substandard execution. So this $120 billion is starting to make more sense when we see how organizations are actually behaving. Let's look at the other side of the coin. When we've seen companies have better plans and we've scored their project quality, we've seen a higher probability of on-time completion. In fact, this is really interesting because you almost see a divide here between the ones that are doing it and the ones that aren't. There's a distinct lack of data points in this upper middle section on these real projects. These are real data points that we've analyzed on real projects. And what we've seen is when projects exhibit the behaviors, and there's 9 in particular, and I'm going to put those 9 right up on the screen in a few moments. There's 9 in particular that when they do well on those 9, they have a successful project. It's almost a one-to-one correlation. It's amazing what we found out. Here's some case studies. I'm going to move a little quicker. I spent way too much time talking about the Grand Canyon, but I love it there. Here are real projects that we've applied the S1 to S5 maturity framework to, and rather than go through each one of these one by one, because I'd love to, but I'd probably end up talking about the Grand Canyon again. 10% average reduction in project costs, 20% average schedule acceleration, and a 91% forecasting accuracy. When they made the commitment to tune up their schedules before execution, these are the gains that they've received. This is not achieving perfection even. This is just increasing the focus on schedule quality. In other words, we have a scoring system that'll score a project from 0 to 100. We've had very few projects that have ever scored 100, but we've had successful projects in that top 20% from 80 to 100 on that scoring. So you don't even have to do it to perfection to reduce poor quality and then increase high quality. What we're seeing in talking about this scoring, this rating system that we have on projects, it's called our Fuse Schedule Index from 0 to 100. The average user of our software in the S1 to S5 maturity framework, they've increased organization-wide and enterprise-wide their scores from the low 50s to the mid-60s. They have therefore, we've correlated this to project success. I'll be showing that in the tool demonstration coming up. That also means they've increased their probability of project success by roughly 10% as well. Okay, let's talk about these metrics. I'm going to move a little bit quickly here. Again, you're going to receive all these slides because I'm going to try to do about a 10 or 15-minute demonstration of how I take a schedule of unknown realism and try to understand whether or not this is a schedule we can go into battle with, or if I know right now if I'm going to lose the battle. Some key words here: objective means of determining schedule quality. This doesn't mean you hand it to an experienced program control expert and they go, looks pretty good. I think you guys will make it. Well, we'd like to be more objective than that. And we also like to measure many, many more things than a human could do simply by doing a cursory review of a schedule. Second, we need to analyze the output from the schedule cost risk models. What we're talking about today doesn't replace the CPM scheduling tool usage that you're doing now. It makes it so you know everything that's going on and going to happen in that scheduling tool during project execution. Pinpointing hotspots, measuring thresholds. I'm looking for those outliers. One, based on predetermined thresholds, what's acceptable and what's unacceptable. But even if something is within predetermined thresholds, but all of a sudden 1 month we have an outlier, we have a spike in missing logic. The average duration of our tasks increases during the second phase of the project. Even if it's within our organizational guidelines, I want to know why there is such a stunning change at one point in time. I also want to receive this information in a way that doesn't require a Six Sigma black belt for me to understand it. And I want to trend this information over time, and I want to use it for historical purposes as well. So when that next project comes along and it has its quality score, I want to know if that score is typical of my organization or if I have an outlier either in a positive direction or negative direction. If it's positive, I want to harness it. If it's negative, I want to make sure that I don't do it again. Validating schedule quality, I'm going to pull these up in the tool, so I'm not going to worry about this for now. I will talk about the importance, I'll soapbox for a minute or so here on the importance of sound logic. That's what you do in a scheduling tool. Among hundreds of other things, the most important is to connect activity A to activity B to activity C in the most efficient way possible. We give you a visual example here of the efficient way and a somewhat inefficient way that can cloud my schedule logic with the redundancy. I've got to avoid kind of the dirty dozen here, circular logic, leads, lags. Most importantly, I want to be able to measure these at an instant. Like I talked about earlier, the diagnosis just doesn't happen once. It can be an everyday thing. Appropriate use of constraints. People who don't use schedule logic love using constraints. People who do like and embrace the use of schedule logic find that they often don't need to use constraints. I can almost look at the percentage of constraints on a project and tell whether or not it's well networked. Float analysis. How much time do I have to delay my work before it starts delaying the project? This is a real telltale because when I see a project with an average float that's around 6 months, and I hear everyone talking about the urgency of schedule on the project, it doesn't match up. I can't have high float basically on any project, unless you're really way ahead of the game doing something to put on the shelf that's going to be used by your stakeholder later on. That's not what I've seen on every weekly status call on every project that I've ever been on. I've seen an urgency towards schedule, and I've seen things come off the rails to where the conversations are a lot more heated 6 months into project execution than they were in the first few weeks. I'm also looking for those maximum float outliers. It concerns me when I see an activity on a project that can float for 2 years. I know that's often not the case. Usually when I ask the question, hey, can you do this 2 years from now? No, it needs to be done by next month. Okay, well, why are we showing float of 700 days? Well, usually it means because we have not identified the proper successors for that activity. So I have a bunch of different ways. Now, I've only looked at 3 here. We're going to expand this view up to 9 in a moment. I have all these different ways to see whether or not there are indicators of schedule quality. Talking about some industry standards, we're not the first ones to look at schedule quality. We're the first ones to take an extremely real-time approach to measuring schedule quality. Schedule quality standards are prevalent in government. I'm going to mention one here that's not listed. The GAO has an awesome schedule assessment guide. In fact, if you go to your search engine of choice and you type GAO schedule assessment guide, it will be the first 2 links. The first one will be to the landing page. The second one will be to the actual document. It's a fantastic document. We've harnessed those metrics in the software that I'll be showing you in a few minutes. And there's some non-government specific metric practices as well through PMI, AACE, Thought Leaders, Deltek, and Acumen. And then many companies have made their own commitment to company-specific scheduling practices as well. Scorecarding, I'm going to pass on this slide for now. I'm going to show you this in the demonstration. And with views, which is the application I'm going to be showing you in a moment, I'm going to show you how I can instantly assess the quality of a schedule and begin taking corrective action right away. Rather than spending my time figuring out what I need to fix, that happens instantly, and I can spend my time actually fixing the problems in my schedule. In fact, we can even fix a couple problems in my schedule if we got some time here. So let me move forward a little bit. Let me go into the demonstration. All right, I'm going to make this full screen here. To save time, I've already opened a project. I haven't even looked at it yet, but I'm going to go. You can see I have the S1 to S5 maturity framework across the top of the screen, across the Deltek Acumen suite here. But first things first, before I look at any of these other items, I need to know if this is a good project or a not so good plan. Because as we said, a good plan, good chance of successful project. Not so good plan, I got to make some improvements. So let's find out. Let's benchmark it. And this is really cool. I told you that we've looked at thousands and thousands of projects to determine a correlation between schedule quality and schedule success. Well, we did not do that analysis and leave that on the shelf. We built that analysis into the software. Now, what you're looking at is the actual curve. I had it in an S-curve before, an accumulative curve. This is kind of an incident curve. What we've done is we've given you the ability to benchmark your project's quality against the quality of all our projects in our database. Now, there's something we know about all those projects that we don't know about your project yet. These are past completed projects. We know whether or not they were successful. Now, we know right now where your project scores on these top 9 metrics. I promised I'd show you what those top 9 are. They're here on the screen right now. Missing logic, the density of logic, how many critical activities I have, how many hard constraints I have. Do I have negative float already in my plan? Do my tasks have durations that are way too long to be manageable? Am I using leads and lags heavily? And do I have activities that have so many predecessors, they're doomed never to start on time? I'll be showing you these same 9. If you didn't catch all those, I'll be showing them to you in a different view in a moment. We're measuring your project on all of those, and we're comparing the characteristics that your project has on these top 9 metrics with all the projects in our database. I used the Olympian example before. Does your project have the qualities of the Olympic level project? Well, let's look at the data here. I have a fuse schedule index on a scale of 0 to 100. This one's 26. That's not good. That's 26, with 100 being the best. That's in the 12th percentile of projects with a 12% probability of success. Schedules that look like mine are only successful 12% of the time. Schedules that look like mine only make it to the Olympics 12% of the time. Do I want an Olympic level project? I may. I probably do, which means I need to improve the quality of this plan before I go to the Olympic trials, before I put this project into execution mode. Now, how do I do that? This is good information. I know where I stand, but where are the problems that I actually need to fix? And to do that, I go to this S2 diagnostic screen. And I've done, in almost no time, I've done a detailed analysis on this project, and here's those same 9 metrics again. Now, we have hundreds in the tool. The reason I'm focusing on these 9 is these 9 each, on their own and as a group, were the strongest predictors of project success. What better than to make those the first 9 that you see when you open the software? Okay, that's great. You're telling me what I already know. It's a bad project. Well, here's the missing logic items. Here's the items that I need to fix today to have a well-networked schedule. It still might not be the right logic, but right now with missing logic, I'm not even giving myself a chance. Here's the 4 items that have hard constraints. Here's the 3 items that in my baseline plan already have negative float. And the others as well, contributing to that score of 26%. Now, to give myself a better starting point, I can cleanse this schedule of some of the bad things that we know are indicators of low quality so that I have a better canvas to start with as I build my quality up. So let's get rid of some of those problem areas. And let's benchmark this new scenario. I brought it to a score of 86%. The system is telling me this new scenario is much better aligned for success than the former because of some of the gotchas that this schedule had. We still have a problem though. I want to see green across the board. In fact, missing logic is arguably the most important metric on the screen, and it's still sitting at 11 items. So my score does look a lot better, and this is such a better starting point than that previous schedule. But until I fix the missing logic, I still have a project that's not very well aligned for success. It's a lot cleaner. It's going to be a lot easier to fix now, and I just saved myself a few hours of time in my scheduling tool by using the cleanser and getting rid of the gotchas, turning to the team and say, this is the schedule we're going to work on. I've got rid of the fluff, I've got rid of the junk, and we're going to work with this more finely tuned schedule, and we're going to focus right away on fixing the missing logic. Now, who do I meet with first? Let's figure that out. I'm going to group this information by the owners of each activity. I have some missing owners. I have Jane, Jim, and Terry. What I've done is I've broken the work down by responsible manager, and I've run my scoring on these metrics by manager. Now, this is a little daunting because it could be viewed as pointing the finger. It's not, because we haven't started executing yet. We're actually just making our plan right now. In the past, we would have thought our plan was done, but it's not. We're still in the process of making this into a real plan. 2 things stick out right away. 1, Jane starts work on the project first, even ahead of the activities where I forgot to put a manager on. Number 2, we're looking at both scenarios now, so it's showing me 22 missing logic items total. We know it's 11 and 11. So Jane, in each plan, each version of the plan, she has 8 missing logic items in each version. It's really the same 8 items. my first meeting is going to be with Jane. And if I fix the issues that Jane has in her schedule, I fixed almost all of the issues with this schedule. Actually, Jim and Terry, they have a high number of lags over here, so I'm going to have a conversation with them about that. But I'm going to start with the manager that has the earliest work, that has the red issue here. In fact, Jane has fewer than 2 links per activity. But as we fix the missing logic, we focus here, and this one is naturally going to come up to green at the same time. In fact, we'll see that in many cases. As we fix one of these, the other ones tend to get better as well. It's a synergy that we see between metrics that will improve your schedule quality quicker than you think. I can do all those schedule quality improvements in this tool, working seamlessly across these different tabs, and then exporting the result to my scheduling tool when I'm done. So I can do my quality improvements and my quality checking in a single environment, and then just push the answer back to the scheduling tool and have my new schedule. Now, this is what we've been developing for the last few years. There's much more to it, but I wanted to give you about a 10-minute peek today. I'm going to show you now the next cool thing that we're working on. And I'm really excited about this because it brings a social element to the table. Now, I would be taking a leap if I said everyone on the call has a Facebook account or a Twitter account or some form of social media, but I'd be willing to wager that it's certainly the overwhelming majority. Now, what we've spent a few years doing at Deltek is figuring out how and why we all engage in social media and how we can bring those social aspects to project execution. Social, the whole social concept does something for us in our personal lives. We can share pictures and events like we never have before. We can live stream video to our friends of what we're doing. Well, how do we translate that to project execution, that same thinking? You know, okay, on a project execution, depending on what we're doing, could be construction where we are sharing pictures and videos with each other. But let's bring this over to this quality and risk assessment portion. Every individual on the project is a special snowflake. They have special knowledge that only they have that can contribute to our understanding of the project's success as a whole. Through polls and screens like this, we can harness that thinking and information and even have conversations off to the side as to why we think that way and assess the risk of certain items on the schedule. Now, there's going to be differences of opinion. I might think an area is low risk, and someone with a few more battle scars in that area might think that they're in a high-risk area. So the question is, how do we get all that together? We do that through voting and capturing all that information. Now, the majority might not win. The program manager or the stakeholder might have some very firm opinions, but wouldn't it be nice to know where the team differs from those opinions, and maybe those opinions need to change? From the stakeholder standpoint, we need to recalibrate based on the thoughts of the team. Today, that happens through meetings. If you miss the meeting, you don't have the information and you didn't get to contribute. We're seeing meetings going down and solutions like this being asked for more and more. How can I get everyone's consensus knowing that I cannot get everyone into the room at the same time? Because we've got Tom in Phoenix, we've got Jen in Austin, and we've got Becca in Virginia. They're in different time zones. We've got David in Australia right now. He's in a completely different time zone. How do we get all that consensus together, knowing we're not even going to get them on the same call, let alone the same room? And that's where we're developing and very near some very cool announcements on rolling out this capability where you can discuss quality and risk without having to have a real-time discussion. Understanding the impacts, I think I have, yeah, I've got one more slide here as well where we talk about the consensus. The consensus on this item, I don't know what this item is, delays around contractor schedules, moderate risk. Well, what if we thought it was low risk going in, sat down with the PM, did a little two-person risk workshop? This is eye-opening that there's much more risk out there than we initially thought. It's good to know that nobody sees a significant risk and only a small group see a high risk. I want to understand why that small group sees a high risk, and maybe that's going to change some of the thinking as well. That's where the conversations come into play, where someone can say, hey guys, there's something you're not thinking about. No one's thinking about this, but I was on the last project and we felt the pain, and if we don't take corrective action now, we're going to be another contributor to that $120 billion. Please feel free to reach out to me. These are the things that I've talked about on this webinar are things that I talk, and we at Deltek talk and think about every single day. It's why we're in business. It's what we've chosen to take on. So thank you for attending. Please reach out to us at any time. We're at deltek.com as well. You can contact us through that and find some more information as well.
Thanks, Tom. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you for joining us today, and please visit deltek.com for more upcoming Deltek events.